Hello, friends. We are interested in the geography of our views, so please like and write in the comments from which city are you watching us, and were there loud stories of betrayal in your city. Perhaps the next story about betrayal will be from your city, and we start. Tom and Melissa sat at the kitchen table in their cozy home on Chicago's north side. Morning light streamed through the large window, reflecting off the white cabinets and granite countertops. There were a couple of mugs of coffee on the table, but the steam from them had long since dissipated. The drinks had cooled, while the couple remained silent. Tom, a tall man with short brown hair slightly streaked with gray at the temples, was scrolling through something on his phone. His brows were furrowed, and his lips were pressed into a thin line. Melissa, with her long blonde hair pulled back into a messy bun, stared out the window, tapping her nails lightly on the rim of her mug. She was 34, he was 36, and their 8-year marriage, once full of life, now seemed like a shadow of the past. "Will you be back late today?" she asked finally, breaking the silence. Her voice was even, but there was a hint of fatigue in it. Tom didn't look up from the screen. "Maybe. We have a deadline for the project. We need to finish the presentation for the client." "Again," Melissa muttered, looking out the window. She watched a neighbor walk his dog, a golden retriever that bounced happily on its leash. "Lately, all you've been doing is sitting at work." Tom sighed, put the phone on the table, and finally looked at her. His brown eyes were slightly red from lack of sleep. "Mel, you know how it works. If I don't close this contract, the boss will take my head off. It's not just sitting at work. This is money, our home, our life." "Our life," she repeated with slight mockery, crossing her arms over her chest. "And I thought our life was just the two of us. Remember when we went to Michigan for the weekend? They just took the car and left. Or how you once took me out dancing in the rain on the street. Where is it all, Tom?" He rolled his eyes, leaning back in his chair. "Oh my God, Melissa, that was 100 years ago. We were young and stupid. We had no mortgage, no bills, no liability. Now everything is different." "Yes, everything is different now," she agreed, and bitterness appeared in her voice. "Now you come home, eat in silence, and then stare at the TV or phone while I try to somehow get through to you." Tom rubbed his temples with his fingers as if trying to ward off an incipient headache. "I'm tired, Mel. I work 10 hours a day, sometimes more. Do you want me to come home and give you a show? I can't be the same all the time as I was before." "Can I?" she answered sharply, leaning forward. "I work too, Tom. I'm tired too. But I don't want to feel like furniture in my own home." He opened his mouth to say something, but then changed his mind and simply shook his head. "Let's not start this again. I have an important day today, and I don't need any extra nerves." Melissa pursed her lips, holding back the urge to continue the argument. She stood up, picked up her mug, and poured the rest of her coffee into the sink. "Okay, have a nice day." Tom watched her leave the kitchen, her footsteps echoing on the wooden floor. He felt a pang of guilt, but quickly brushed it aside. "She's just being dramatic," he told himself, turning back to the phone. He did have a big day ahead of him. A presentation for a major client could earn his firm a contract worth millions. He couldn't afford to be distracted. Melissa, meanwhile, went up to the bedroom, closed the door, and leaned her back against it. Her heart was pounding with suppressed irritation. She didn't want to turn into a wife who always nagged her husband, but how else could she let him know that she was lonely? That she misses the Tom who looked at her like she was the center of his world. She walked to the mirror, looking at her reflection. She still liked the way she looked: slender figure, soft features, blue eyes that once made Tom say he was drowning in them. But now he barely noticed her. Melissa ran her hand through her hair, unraveling the bun, and sighed. Maybe it's her. Maybe she has become bored. Or has he changed? Her phone vibrated on the nightstand. It was a message from her colleague, Jake, with whom she worked at a marketing agency. "Hey, are you going to a meeting today about a new project? Need your brain for ideas." Melissa smiled. Jake was new to their team, tall, with dark curly hair and an infectious laugh. He always knew how to cheer her up, even on the grayest days. She quickly replied, "Yes, I will. I'll bring coffee if I'm not late." She put down her phone and headed to her closet to pick out clothes for the day. Maybe at least work would distract her from this painful morning. Tom arrived at the office in the city center, parking his gray SUV in the underground parking lot. His tailored dark blue suit fit perfectly, but he still felt out of place. The presentation was in 2 hours, and he mentally ran through the slides as he walked to the elevator. In the office, he was greeted by the usual hum ringing phones, clattering keyboards, snatches of conversations. His partner, Steve, waved to him from the table. "Are you ready to conquer the world?" Steve asked with a grin, taking a sip from his best dad mug. Tom forced a smile. "If the world is the board of directors of Harper Industries, then yes, I'm ready." "Relax, dude. You'll learn it by heart." "We'll tear them apart," Steve said, slapping him on the shoulder. Tom nodded, but inside he wasn't so sure. In recent months, he had felt that he was losing his grip not only at home, but also at work. He sat down at his desk, opened his laptop, and tried to concentrate, but Melissa's words still echoed in his head. "I don't want to feel like furniture." Maybe she's right. Maybe he really has moved away. He shook his head, driving away these thoughts. Now is not the time. We have to work. Melissa walked into her agency's office holding 2 Starbucks coffees. Jake was already waiting for her outside the conference room, leaning against the wall with a relaxed smile. "You weren't kidding about the coffee," he said, accepting the glass. "Thank you. Are you okay? You look a little, I don't know, tense?" She shrugged, forcing herself to smile. "It's just that the morning wasn't the easiest." "It's okay. Do you want to tell me?" he asked, opening the door to the meeting room and letting her go forward. "I know how to listen. Well, or at least pretend." Melissa laughed for the first time that morning sincerely. "Maybe later. Let's get this project out of the way first." They sat down at the table, and while Jake turned on the projector, Melissa stole a glance at him. He was a couple of years younger than her, but there was some lightness about him that she so lacked. He joked, asked questions, and asked her opinion. And damn, he looked at her like she actually meant something. The meeting went quickly. He and Jake came up with a couple of ideas for an advertising campaign for a new client, and the boss was pleased. After the meeting, Jake caught up with her in the hallway. "Listen, if you need to talk, we can grab lunch and sit somewhere." "No pressure," he said, tilting his head slightly. Melissa hesitated. She wanted to say yes, but the image of Tom sitting at the kitchen table with that distant look in her head popped into her head. She nodded. "Fine, let's go." Tom finished his presentation by lunchtime. Clients shook his hand, patted him on the shoulder, and said they would contact him in a couple of days. Steve was delighted, but Tom only felt tired. He sat in his chair, looking at the skyscrapers outside the window, and for the first time that day, he allowed himself to think about Melissa. He remembered how they met at a party with a mutual friend. She danced in the living room, laughed at his clumsy attempts to sing along to the song, and then they ran to the balcony and talked until the morning. Then he couldn't take his eyes off her. When did it all go away? His phone vibrated. It was a message from Melissa. "I'll be late at work. Don't wait until dinner." Tom frowned. She usually didn't write so dryly. He started to type an answer, but stopped. What could he say? "Fine. I miss." Instead, he simply put the phone in his pocket and went back to work. Melissa and Jake were sitting in a small cafe near the office. She ordered a salad, he ordered a sandwich, and now they were chatting about all kinds of nonsense about movies, about colleagues, about how their boss once spilled coffee on his tie during a meeting. "Are you always so serious at home?" Jake asked, taking a bite of his sandwich. Melissa shook her head. "No, it's just, things have been kind of hard lately. Tom is my husband, I don't know how to explain. It's like he's not with me." Jake nodded, his gaze softening. "Understand. Sometimes people move away without even noticing it. Have you tried to talk to him?" "I tried," she said, fiddling with a napkin. "This morning, for example. but he simply waved it off. He said that he had work and that he was tired. I'm tired too, but I'm not hiding behind it. Maybe he needs a reminder of what he's missing, Jake said with a small smile. You're awesome, Melissa. Anyone would have noticed it. She felt her cheeks flush slightly and looked away. Thank you. I don't know what to do next. Take your time, he advised. Sometimes you need to give yourself time to understand what you want. And if he doesn't see what you are like, that's his problem, not yours. Tom returned home late. The house was quiet. Dark Melissa had not yet returned. He threw the keys on the table in the hallway, took off his jacket, and walked into the kitchen. There was a note on the refrigerator. Food in container, heat it up if you want. Her handwriting, neat and familiar, made him freeze. He suddenly realized that he didn't remember the last time he said something nice to her. He took out his phone and wrote, "Thanks for the food. Will you be there soon?" The answer came a minute later. "No, I'm late. I'll be back soon." Tom sat down at the table, looking at the empty kitchen. For the first time in a long time, he felt that something was wrong. And for the first time, he wondered if he could fix it. Tom and Melissa were driving along a winding road along the coast of Maine. The windows of their SUV rolled down, and the salty sea air filled the cabin. Silence reigned in the car, interrupted only by the hum of tires on the asphalt and the occasional cries of seagulls in the distance. After weeks of tense arguments and nights of sleeping with their backs turned to each other, this trip seemed like a last-ditch effort to make things right. Tom's parents' house, an old wooden cottage with peeling blue paint, sat on the edge of a cliff overlooking the Atlantic Ocean. They decided to spend the summer there, away from Chicago, away from work, away from the routine that was slowly suffocating them. Tom gripped the steering wheel tightly, his eyes glued to the road. He felt like he should say something, but the words stuck in his throat. Melissa sat nearby, looking out the window, her blonde hair slightly tousled by the wind. She was wearing a light linen shirt and denim shorts, looking just like she did when they first started dating. This made Tom think for a moment, but he quickly pushed those thoughts away. They came here not to delve into the past, but to try to improve the present. "It's not far," he finally said, breaking the silence. His voice sounded slightly hoarse from the long silence. Melissa nodded, not taking her eyes off the scenery. "Fine. I remember this turn. We came here. I think it was the second year after the wedding." "Yes," Tom confirmed, smiling slightly. "Then you burned marshmallows at the stake and laughed that it was a culinary masterpiece." She turned to him, and the corners of her lips twitched into a faint smile. "And you tried to save them, but only got dirty in ash. Your mother then grumbled all evening that you ruined your shirt." Tom chuckled, and for a moment there was something like warmth between them. But it quickly faded as he turned onto the gravel path leading to the house. The car shook over the bumps, and Melissa turned back to the window. They parked in front of the cottage. The house looked just as Tom remembered it. 2 stories, with a wide veranda overlooking the ocean and an old whale weather vane on the roof. The paint was peeling in places, and the steps creaked underfoot as they stood up, suitcases in hand. Tom opened the door with a key that was kept under a flower pot, a tradition in his family, and they went inside. The inside smelled of wood and slightly damp. The living room was furnished with old furniture, a tattered sofa with a floral pattern, a wooden coffee table with mug marks still visible on it, and a fireplace full of ash from its last use. Above the fireplace hung a painting of a lighthouse, the work of Tom's mother, who liked to paint in her spare time. "We need some air," Melissa said, putting her suitcase down by the stairs. She walked to the window and opened it, letting in fresh air. The waves roared somewhere below, and the sound filled the room. Tom nodded, looking around. "I'll check the boiler and bring firewood. It may be cold in the evening." "Okay," she answered briefly and began to climb the stairs with her suitcase. Tom looked after her, feeling the familiar tension tightening his chest again. They were here, away from everything, but the distance between them never went away. While Tom worked on the boiler in the basement, Melissa unpacked her things in the second-floor bedroom. The room was small, with a double bed covered in an old quilt and a chest of drawers on which sat a faded photograph of Tom's parents when they were young. The window overlooked the ocean, and she stopped, looking at the endless blue. She always liked this place, its silence, its simplicity. Once upon a time, she and Tom spent whole days here, walking along the shore, collecting shells, or just sitting on the veranda with a bottle of wine. Now she wasn't sure if they could even talk without it escalating into another fight. She heard Tom's footsteps on the stairs and turned around. He entered the room, wiping his hands on his jeans. "The boiler is working. Hot water will be here in an hour," he said, glancing at her open suitcase. "Have you already sorted your things?" "Just started," she replied, pulling out a couple of t-shirts and putting them on the dresser. "And you?" "I'll leave everything downstairs for now." "I'll go get some firewood," he said, and was already turning to the door, but stopped. "Mel, are you hungry? I can cook something." She looked at him, slightly surprised. Tom rarely offered to cook in recent years. He either ordered food or left it to her. "Yes, a little. What do we have?" "I grabbed something from Chicago. Pasta, sauce, and some vegetables." "I can make some pasta if you want," he offered. "Sounds good," she said, a hint of gratitude in her voice. "I'll be down in a couple of minutes to help." Tom nodded and left. Melissa remained standing by the window, feeling conflicting emotions fighting inside her. She wanted to believe that this summer could change something, but she knew too well how easily they slipped into the usual coldness. The kitchen in the house was small but cozy. Tom put a pot of water on the stove while Melissa chopped tomatoes and onions for a simple sauce. They worked in silence, but the silence was not as heavy as in Chicago. Maybe it was the sound of the waves outside the window, or the fact that they were both trying not to ruin this first evening. "Do you remember how we made pizza here?" Melissa suddenly asked, without looking up from the board. "You dropped the dough on the floor, and then we spent the whole evening cleaning it up." Tom laughed briefly, but sincerely. "Yes, and then they decided that it would be easier to order delivery. Only here there was no delivery, and we ate crackers with cheese." She smiled as she continued cutting. It was fun, even despite the ruined dinner. "Yes," he agreed, stirring the pasta in the boiling water. "We laughed a lot then." Melissa nodded, and for a moment she wanted to ask why they stopped laughing together. But she remained silent, afraid to ruin the fragile moment. Instead, she said, "I'll have to go into town tomorrow to buy groceries. There are probably only canned goods left here." "Good idea," Tom replied. "Maybe we can take a walk along the shore at the same time. There's that old pier where we used to catch crabs." "You let them go later because you were sorry," she teased. "And you wanted to cook them, but didn't know how," he retorted, and they both laughed. Dinner went smoothly. They ate at a small table on the veranda, watching the sunset on the horizon, turning the sky orange and pink. The pasta was simple but delicious, and Melissa even complimented Tom on the sauce. After dinner, he insisted that he wash the dishes himself, and she remained sitting with a glass of wine that they found in the pantry. "Are you sure you can handle it?" she shouted through the open door. "I'm not helpless, Mel," he responded with a slight mockery. "Go enjoy the view." She leaned back in her chair, listening to the sound of the waves and the occasional sound of dishes in the sink. For the first time in a long time, she felt something resembling peace. But deep down, she knew that one evening was not enough to fix everything. Night fell on the coast, and the temperature dropped. Tom lit a fire in the fireplace, and he and Melissa sat on the sofa, covering themselves with an old wool blanket. The flames crackled, casting a warm glow on their faces. Melissa was holding a mug of tea in her hands, and Tom was looking at the fire, thoughtfully fiddling with the edge of the blanket. "I'm glad we came here," he said quietly, without looking at her. "In Chicago, there was too much of everything." "Yes," she agreed, taking a sip of tea. "There I felt that we were simply existing next to each other and not living." Tom nodded, and his face became more serious. "I know I haven't been the best husband lately. Work, stress. I didn't want it to affect us like that." Melissa looked at him, trying to figure out how sincere he was. Do you really think so? Or are these just words to keep me from getting angry? He turned to her, and a hint of resentment flashed in his eyes. I'm serious, Mel. I see that you are unhappy, and I don't want it to stay like this. She looked away, feeling her throat tighten. I don't want to either, but I need more than just words, Tom. I need to feel that you are with me and not somewhere in my head or in the office. I'm trying, he said, and there was tension in his voice. This summer, I thought it would give us a chance. Figure out. Maybe, she answered quietly, but we both have to try. He nodded, and they fell silent again, but this time the silence was not so oppressive. The fire in the fireplace was dying down, and Melissa moved a little closer to Tom, resting her head on his shoulder. He didn't pull away, but after a minute he put his arm around her shoulders. It was a small step, but it meant more to both of them than they were willing to admit. The next morning they woke up early. The sun was just beginning to rise over the ocean, its light shining through the curtains. Melissa got up first, went down to the kitchen, and put on the coffee maker. Tom joined her a few minutes later, still disheveled from sleep, but with a slight smile. Shall we go for a walk after coffee? He suggested, pouring himself a cup. Go ahead, she agreed. I want to look at that pier. They dressed warmly, the morning air was cool, and left the house. The path to the pier led through a narrow path along a cliff, surrounded by tall grass and sparse pine trees. The waves crashed against the rocks below, and Melissa took a deep breath, feeling the salty wind drive away the remnants of sleep. It's beautiful here, she said, stopping to look at the ocean. Yes, Tom agreed, standing next to him. I forgot how much I love this place. She looked at him, and for a moment it seemed to her that she saw the Tom she had once loved open, real. Maybe we should come here more often. Maybe, he answered, and his hand found hers. He squeezed her fingers lightly, and Melissa did not pull away. They reached the pier, an old structure, darkened with time, protruding into the water. There was a bench at the end of the pier, and they sat looking out at the horizon. Melissa leaned against Tom, and he put his arm around her like he did last night. For the first time in a long time, they just sat together, not arguing, not blaming, just enjoying the moment. Do you think we can do it? She asked quietly, without looking at him. Tom paused before answering. I want it to work. And you? Me too, she said, and there was a mixture of hope and fear in her voice. It was a clear morning on the Maine coast, with a light breeze carrying the scent of salt and pine trees. Tom and Melissa decided after breakfast simple toast with jam and coffee to go to a small town nearby to buy groceries and perhaps take a stroll through the local shops. They rode in silence, but it was more comfortable than strained, the result of the previous evening by the fireplace and the morning walk to the pier. For the first time in a long time, there was a faint spark of hope between them. The town, Lobster Cove, was a typical coastal community. Narrow cobblestone streets, wooden houses with signs that read fresh oysters and lobsters every day, and a tiny market where locals sold everything from fish to homemade candles. Tom parked the car at the old pier, and they stepped out, breathing in the fresh air. Let's go to that store, Melissa suggested, pointing to a small grocery store with a sign Joe's. It seemed like everything we needed was there. Good idea, Tom nodded, putting his hands in his jeans pockets. Maybe we can get something for dinner on the grill. If you don't burn the meat, then I'm all for it, she teased with a slight smile. He rolled his eyes, but the corners of his lips twitched. I overcooked a steak once in my life, and you'll never forget it. They entered the store, and the ringing of the bell above the door announced their arrival. It was cramped inside, but cozy, with shelves full of canned goods, fresh vegetables, and all sorts of odds and ends like fishing gear and postcards of Maine. Melissa picked up the basket and headed to the vegetables, while Tom went to the meat counter to pick out something to grill. While Melissa was choosing between tomatoes and cucumbers, she heard a low, confident voice behind her. Well, I wonder who I see. Melissa, right? She turned around and froze, meeting the gaze of a tall man in a dark blue jacket and jeans. He had short, dark hair streaked with gray, tan skin, and a smile that radiated effortless confidence. His green eyes looked at her with obvious interest. She immediately recognized him as Jason Keller, Tom's former classmate. They crossed paths a couple of years ago at a high school reunion in Chicago, where she went with Tom. Then Jason impressed her with his charisma and ease of communication, although they only exchanged a couple of phrases. "Jason," she said, squinting slightly to make sure she wasn't mistaken. "Do you live here?" He grinned, stepping closer and resting his hand on the shelf. "Not really. I have a summer house here. I come when I want to escape from the bustle of the city." "What are you doing here? With Tom, I guess?" "Yes, we decided to spend the summer at his parents' house," she replied, involuntarily smiling in response to his infectious energy. "We just stopped by for groceries." "Great choice," Jason said, nodding toward her basket. "Although, to be honest, the tomatoes here are not so great. Better take potatoes local, fresh." "Thanks for the advice," Melissa said, tilting her head slightly. "Do you come here often?" "As soon as I can," he replied, and his gaze lingered on her a little longer than necessary. "It's quiet and beautiful here, and it seems now there are also pleasant acquaintances." She felt a slight heat on her cheeks from his tone. There was an overt note of flirtation in it, but it was presented so naturally that it did not seem intrusive. She looked away to the shelves, trying to hide her embarrassment, and said, "Well, this is a small town. Everyone here probably knows each other." "Almost," he agreed, crossing his arms over his chest. "But I would definitely remember people like you." Melissa laughed, short but sincere. "Are you always so sociable?" "Only with those who are worth it," he answered with a sly smile, and at that moment Tom approached them, holding a package of steaks in his hands. "Jason." Tom frowned, clearly surprised. "What are you doing here?" "Tom, old man." Jason broke into a wide smile and extended his hand for a handshake. "I came for the summer, taking a break from Chicago. So you ran away here with Melissa?" Tom shook his hand, but his gaze slid to Melissa, as if he was trying to understand what they were talking about before he arrived. "Yes, we decided to take a break. Long time no see, by the way. How are you?" "Great," Jason said, clapping Tom on the shoulder. "I work in a construction company. Things are going uphill. Are you still digging into your contracts?" "We have to," Tom answered with a slight grin. "Someone has to pay for this vacation." "Well, you've always been a workaholic." Jason winked and then turned to Melissa. "How do you cope with this bore?" "Sometimes with difficulty," she joked, glancing at Tom. He rolled his eyes, but did not object. "I understand," Jason said, lowering his voice as if he was sharing a secret. "If anything, I'm not far from here. I can keep you company so you don't get bored." Melissa laughed again, feeling his words teeter between friendly teasing and something more. Tom seemed to notice this too. His smile became a little more intense. "We can handle this," he said, placing his hand on Melissa's shoulder. "But good to see you, dude. Maybe you can come by sometime. We have a grill. We could have a barbecue." "My pleasure," Jason replied, not taking his eyes off Melissa. "Just tell me when. And Melissa, if anything, I know the best places to walk around here. I can show you." "Thank you, I'll think about it," she said, trying to keep her tone neutral, although something inside trembled from his attention. They said goodbye, and Jason went to the cash register, throwing one last smile in Melissa's direction. Tom watched him go and then turned to her. "He's always been like this," he muttered, taking the basket from her hands. "Likes to show off." "He's just friendly," Melissa said with a shrug. "It's okay." Tom chuckled, but didn't say anything, and they continued shopping. However, she noticed that he became a little more attentive to her. He helped her choose products, asked her opinion about little things, which he had not done before. She liked it, although she wasn't sure if it had to do with Jason or their conversation yesterday. The next day, the weather deteriorated. The sky was covered with gray clouds, and a cold wind blew from the ocean. Tom and Melissa decided to stay in the house, but by lunchtime, Tom remembered about the invitation to Jason. "Maybe we should call him today," he suggested, sitting on the sofa with a mug of coffee. You can't go outside anyway, but the meat is in the refrigerator. Melissa, curled up with a book under her blanket, looked up. Why not? It will be fun. Tom nodded and wrote Jason a short message. Half an hour later, he replied that he would arrive in the evening. Melissa couldn't help but wonder how the evening would go. Jason clearly knew how to fill a space, and his interest in her was obvious. But she decided not to dwell on it. She and Tom were trying to make things work, and she didn't want to complicate things. By 6 in the evening, Jason appeared on the doorstep with a bottle of red wine in his hands. He was wearing a gray sweatshirt and jeans, but even in such simple clothes, he looked confident and attractive. "Hello, owners," he said, entering the house. "The wine is for you, so that you don't get kicked out empty-handed." "Thank you," Tom smiled, accepting the bottle. "Come on in. Now we'll light the grill in the living room, since it's raining outside." "Great plan," Jason said, taking off his jacket. His gaze found Melissa standing by the fireplace, adding wood. "Melissa, you are even more beautiful today than yesterday. This house suits you." She felt her cheeks turn slightly pink and answered with a smile. "Thank you. I'm just trying not to freeze. If anything, I can help," he winked, and Tom, who had just returned with a plate of steaks, coughed. "Let's better deal with the grill hero," he said, but there was no real anger in his voice. They set up a portable grill in the living room near an open window to let the smoke escape, and soon the smell of grilled meat filled the house. Melissa set the table with plates, salad, and wine, and the men got busy cooking, bantering with each other like old-school times. She watched them, feeling strangely relieved. Tom looked relaxed, and Jason added lightness to the evening. During dinner, the conversation flowed freely. Jason talked about his job, how he once almost sank a boat while trying to fish, and his love for the Maine coast. "Have you guys been here for a long time?" he asked, taking a sip of wine. "A couple of years," Tom answered, looking at Melissa. "We decided it was time to return." "Smart," Jason said, turning to Melissa. "How are you getting used to the silence here? Or do you miss Chicago?" "I like silence," she replied, meeting his gaze, "although sometimes there is not enough movement or something." "I understand," he nodded. "If you want to move, tell me. I know a couple of places where you can dance or just unwind." His tone was light, but there was a sparkle in his eyes, and Melissa felt her pulse quicken slightly. She smiled, trying not to show her excitement. "Thank you, I'll keep it in mind." Tom, sitting opposite, put down his fork and took a glass of wine. "We plan to hang out here together more," he said, looking at Jason. "But if anything happens, we'll call you for help." "Always ready," Jason replied with a grin, raising his glass. "For you guys, and for this summer." They clinked glasses, and the evening continued in the same spirit with jokes, memories, and light wine. But Melissa couldn't help but notice how every now and then Jason found a reason to turn to her, throw a compliment, or simply hold his gaze. It was pleasant. His attention awakened something long forgotten in her. However, Tom was nearby, who seemed to also see this and tried to be closer to her than usual. When Jason left, promising to stop by again, Tom closed the door and turned to Melissa. "How did you like your evening?" he asked, clearing the plates from the table. "Okay," she answered, helping him. "He's funny, and you seem to have relaxed." "Yes, he always knew how to make you laugh," Tom agreed, but then added more quietly, "Just don't get too used to him, okay?" Melissa looked at him, surprised. "What do you mean?" "Nothing," he said, shrugging his shoulders. "He's just, well, you saw what he's like. Loves attention." She nodded but remained silent. She didn't want to argue, but deep down she knew Jason had piqued her curiosity, and this feeling frightened her no less than it pleased her. The morning dawned overcast, with low clouds clinging to the horizon over the ocean. Tom and Melissa woke up at Tom's parents' old house on the coast of Maine, and although their evening with Jason the night before had been fun, there was another slight awkwardness between them. Tom decided to stay home and fix the creaking step on the porch. a task he had been putting off for a couple of days. Melissa, feeling the need to be alone, announced that she wanted to go for a walk. "I'll walk along the shore and get some air," she said, pulling on a light jacket over her jeans and t-shirt. Her blonde hair was pulled back into a loose ponytail, and she looked fresh despite the tiredness in her eyes. Tom, sitting in the kitchen with a mug of coffee and a screwdriver in his hand, nodded. "Fine. Just don't go too far, okay? The weather may turn bad." "Don't worry, I won't be long," she answered, glancing at him briefly. She wasn't sure if she wanted him to come with her or if she really needed time alone. The last few days had been a mixture of hope and tension, and she wanted to sort out her feelings. She left the house, closing the door behind her, and headed towards the path leading to the shore. The waves made noise as they crashed against the rocks, and the wind ruffled her hair, knocking strands out of her ponytail. Melissa took a deep breath of the salty air, feeling it clear her thoughts. She loved this place, its rugged beauty, its silence. But lately, the silence in her life had become too loud, and she didn't know how to fix it. After walking about a mile along the bluff, she decided to go down to Lobster Cove Marina, an old wooden structure where local fishermen unloaded their boats. She wanted to look at the bustle, at the people who lived their simple lives here. Maybe this will distract her from the endless cycle of thoughts about Tom, about their marriage, about where everything is heading. The pier was busy. Several fishermen were sorting their catch, shouting to each other. Seagulls circled overhead, hoping to snatch a piece. Melissa stopped at the edge, looking out over the water, when she noticed a wooden box full of nets and some tools that someone had left right in the path. She decided to go around it, but tripped over a rope sticking out of it, and the box tilted, threatening to fall. "Damn," she muttered, trying to hold him back with her hands. The box was heavier than it looked, and her palms slid against the rough wood. "Hey, be careful." A familiar voice came from behind, and a second later Jason appeared next to him. He quickly grabbed the box from the other side, easily lifting it and setting it in place. "This is not your burden, Melissa." She straightened up, slightly out of breath, and looked at him. Jason stood in front of her in a gray t-shirt and jeans, with a slight smile on his lips. His dark hair was slightly tousled by the wind, and his green eyes sparkled with their usual mischief. "Thank you," she said, dusting off her hands. "I didn't think it was so heavy." "Yes, this is half a fisherman's trash," he grinned, crossing his arms over his chest. "Are you alone here? Where is your hard-working husband?" "At home, fixing the veranda," she answered, shrugging her shoulders, "and I decided to take a walk." "Great choice," Jason said, looking around. "Just be careful with these things. Fishermen throw them anywhere. Would you like me to help you deliver something, or are you just walking lightly?" "Light," she smiled. "I just wanted air." He nodded as if he understood more than she said. "Well, since we're running into each other here, how about a glass of wine? There's a cafe over there by the pier, nothing special, but the view is cool and the wine is decent." Melissa hesitated. She didn't want to go back to Tom right now, but going with Jason was something else. His presence aroused a mixture of curiosity and slight excitement in her, and she couldn't deny that she liked it. "I don't know," she said, looking at the water. "I didn't plan to stay late." "One glass," he insisted, tilting his head with that same smile that made him so charming. "I won't kidnap you for a long time. I promise." She laughed, giving in. "Okay, one glass." They reached a cafe, a small wooden building with an open terrace overlooking the ocean. The tables were simple, darkened wood, and above the entrance there was a sign that read Marges. Jason chose a table near the railing, overlooking the pier and the waves, and motioned for the waitress to come over. "Two glasses of your best red," he said, and then turned to Melissa. "I hope you don't mind red. If so, I can order white." "Red is excellent," she answered, settling into a chair. The wind was softer here, and she took off her jacket, hanging it on the back. The waitress brought the wine in simple glass glasses, and Jason raised his own. "For chance meetings," he said, clinking glasses with her. "For them," Melissa agreed, taking a sip. The wine was tart, with a slight berry aftertaste, and she felt the tension in her shoulders release a little. They sat in silence for a couple of minutes, looking at the water. Jason was the first to break the silence. "You know, I remember you from that high school reunion," he said, twirling the glass in his hands. "You were in a blue dress then, and Tom didn't leave your side. I also thought he was lucky." Melissa smiled, remembering that evening. "Yes, it was a long time ago. We were closer then. And now?" he asked, his voice becoming a little quieter, as if he was testing boundaries. She looked at him, not knowing how to answer. His gaze was attentive, but not oppressive, and there was something in it that made her heart speed up slightly. "Now everything is more complicated," she finally said, turning her eyes to the ocean. "I understand," he nodded. "Life likes to complicate things, but you don't look like the type to give up." "Sometimes I want to," she admitted, and she was surprised at her frankness. "But I'm still here, trying." Jason leaned a little closer, resting his elbows on the table. "That's what makes you special, Melissa. You are not just beautiful, you have strength. And to be honest, I don't understand how Tom doesn't see this." Her cheeks flushed slightly, and she looked away, hiding her smile. "You give too many compliments." "Only when they are true," he answered with a sly grin. "And I'm not kidding. You deserve to be noticed." She looked at him, and something electric hung between them, elusive but palpable. Jason didn't look away, and there was more than just friendliness in his gaze. Melissa felt the warmth from the wine mix with the warmth inside her, and it was a dangerously good feeling. "Thank you," she said quietly, trying to return the conversation to a safe direction. "And you? What brings you here besides the summer house?" "I wanted freedom," he answered, leaning back in his chair. "There is too much noise and obligations in Chicago. Here I can breathe, and it seems meeting interesting people." "Are you talking about me?" she teased, raising an eyebrow. "Who are you talking about?" he said, and his smile grew wider. "It's not every day you save boxes at the pier." She laughed, and the tension between them dissipated a little, but did not disappear completely. They continued chatting about trifles, about the weather, about how he once capsized in a kayak on this very shore. Jason spoke with such vivacity that Melissa found herself smiling more often than she had in recent weeks with Tom. When the glasses were empty, he looked at her with slight regret. "Well, is it time to let you go back?" "I guess," she said, although part of her didn't want to leave. "Tom has probably already finished with the step." "If anything happens, you know where to find me," Jason said, standing up and extending his hand to help her up. His fingers lingered on her palm a little longer than necessary, and she felt a slight trembling. "I know," she answered, taking the jacket. "Thanks for the wine, and for the company." "You're welcome," he said, and there was a soft, almost intimate note in his voice. "Be careful on the way back, Melissa. And if you want to take another walk, let me know." She nodded, feeling his words sink in somewhere deep inside. They said goodbye, and she walked back to the path, feeling his gaze on her, until she disappeared around the bend. The walk home took longer than she expected. Melissa deliberately slowed down to think about what had happened. Jason was like a breath of fresh air, his attention, his ease, his obvious interest in her. This was what she had been missing with Tom lately, but she knew this was dangerous territory. She came here with Tom to fix their marriage, not to look for something new. When she entered the house, Tom was standing at the living room window, looking out at the ocean. Hearing the door creak, he turned around. "You took a long time," he said, and there was no reproach in his voice, only a slight surprise. "Everything is fine." "Yes, I just went to the pier," she answered, taking off her jacket. "It was beautiful there, despite the wind." "Okay," he nodded, coming closer. "I fixed the step. Now it doesn't squeak." "Great," she said, forcing herself to smile. "I'll go make some tea." "Want?" "Go ahead," he agreed, and she walked into the kitchen, feeling his gaze on her. While the water was heating up, Melissa stood at the stove, staring into space. Her thoughts went back to Jason, his smile, the way he looked at her, how easy it was for her to talk to him. She didn't want to admit it, but there was an attraction. and it scared her because Tom was there, still trying to be with her, albeit clumsily. The day began calmly after Melissa's walk to the pier. The skies over the Maine coast had cleared, and the sun was bathing the old house in a warm glow. Tom and Melissa ate breakfast on the veranda, bacon and eggs and coffee, cooked together in a rare act of cooperation. They hardly spoke, but the silence was more familiar than tense. Tom was leafing through a local newspaper he found in a drawer, and Melissa was looking at the ocean, thoughtfully twirling a spoon in her hands. Her mind was still filled with fragments of yesterday's meeting with Jason, his words, his look, the way he easily made her smile. She tried to brush these thoughts aside, but they returned like waves to the shore. After breakfast, Tom decided to do some minor repairs, check the kitchen faucet, which was leaking slightly. Melissa offered to help, but he waved him off, saying that he could handle it himself. She shrugged and walked into the living room, picking up the book she had started reading a couple of days ago. However, she couldn't concentrate, the lines blurred before her eyes, and she found herself thinking about how Jason had leaned towards her in the cafe, how his voice had become a little softer when he talked about freedom. Tom finished the tap faster than expected and walked into the living room, drying his hands with a towel. He stood in the doorway, looking at Melissa, who was sitting on the couch, staring at a book, but clearly not reading. "Are you okay?" he asked, throwing the towel on the back of the chair. She looked up, startled slightly by his voice. "Yes, everything is fine. Just thinking." "About what?" he continued, sitting down opposite in the old chair. His tone was casual, but there was a hint of curiosity in his eyes. Melissa shrugged, closing the book. "Yes, nothing special. About the weather, probably." Tom nodded, but didn't look away. He noticed that she had been a little distracted since she returned from her walk yesterday. At first, he chalked it up to fatigue, but now something in her behavior, slight nervousness, evasiveness, made him wary. "You took a long walk yesterday," he said, trying to sound casual. "What was there on the pier?" She tensed, although she tried to hide it. "Nothing special. Fishermen, boats. I just looked at the water." "One?" he asked, and there was a note in his voice that she immediately detected, a mixture of suspicion and concern. Melissa frowned as she placed the book on the table. "Yes, alone." "And what?" Tom shrugged, but his gaze became sharper. "It's just strange. You left for a couple of hours, and someone else came back." "I don't know, someone else. That's why I'm asking." "Another?" she asked again, and irritation was heard in her voice. "What do you mean?" "I don't know, Mel," he said, leaning back in his chair. "You were thoughtful and silent, as if something had happened. I just want to understand." She pursed her lips, feeling anger boiling inside her. She didn't like his tone. He sounded like he had the right to demand an account. "Nothing happened, Tom. I was just walking. Do you have to control everything?" "Control?" he repeated, frowning. "I don't control. I'm asking because I care." "But it seems to me that you don't trust me," she answered sharply, getting up from the sofa. "I went for a walk to clear my head, and you're already thinking God knows what." Tom stood up too, and his voice became louder. "I'm not making this up, Melissa. You came back yesterday, and I immediately felt something was wrong. You didn't even really tell where you were, what you did. I'm your husband. Can I at least know?" "Know what?" she snapped, crossing her arms over her chest. "What air did I breathe? Have you looked at the waves? God, Tom, this is funny. You act like I have to account for every move. And you act as if you have something to hide." He blurted out, and his words hung in the air, heavy and sharp. Melissa froze, looking at him with a mixture of anger and resentment. She could talk about Jason, say that she met him by chance, that they drank wine, that it was nothing. But his tone, his suspicions, ignited something stubborn in her. She didn't want to make excuses, didn't want to feel guilty for simply enjoying the moment. "Are you serious?" she said, lowering her voice, but it rang with steel. "Do you think I'm cheating on you or what? Because I left the house alone." "I didn't say that," Tom snapped, but his face turned red, indicating that a thought had flashed through his head. "But you could have just answered normally and not played the victim." A victim? She asked, and her voice broke into a scream. You're the one making me into some kind of suspect now. I came here with you to set things right, but instead you start interrogating me, because you don't give me a reason not to ask, he barked back. You're moving away, Mel. I see it. And yesterday you returned not the same as you left. What should I think? Think what you want, she said, turning towards the stairs. I'm not going to make excuses for breathing without your permission. Melissa, wait, he began, stepping behind her, but she was already walking up the steps. Leave me alone, Tom, she said over her shoulder, her voice shaking with anger. I need to cool down. She slammed the bedroom door, leaving him standing downstairs. Tom clenched his fists, looking at the closed door, and muttered something unintelligible. He felt that he had gone too far, but her reaction only added fuel to the fire of his suspicions. He returned to the living room, sat on the sofa, and stared out the window, trying to figure out what went wrong. Melissa sat on the edge of the bed, wrapping her arms around herself. Her heart was pounding, and there was a lump in her throat. She was angry with Tom for his questions, for his tone, for making her feel guilty. But somewhere deep down, she knew that her anger was not only about him. The meeting with Jason, his attention, his words, all this stirred up something in her that she did not expect. And now she couldn't just brush it off. She lay down on the bed, looking at the ceiling. She didn't want to go downstairs and didn't want to continue this conversation. Tom had always been like this, straightforward, sometimes to the point of rudeness, but she had known how to deal with it before. Now every question he asked seemed like an accusation to her. The hours passed slowly. Tom remained downstairs, fiddling with something in the kitchen, but did not go up to her. In the evening, as the sun began to set, he knocked on the bedroom door. Mel, I made dinner, he said through the door. His voice was quieter than before, but there was still tension in it. Come down if you want. She didn't answer. A minute later, she heard him coming down the stairs. Melissa stood up, walked to the window, and looked out at the ocean darkening in the twilight. She didn't want to eat. She didn't want to put up with it, not now. She grabbed a pillow and blanket and headed to the small guest room at the end of the hallway. If Tom wants to control her every move, let him sleep alone. Tom sat at the kitchen table, looking at the plate of pasta he had prepared. He made 2 servings, but the second one remained untouched. When he heard Melissa coming down the stairs, he looked up, hoping that she had come, but the footsteps were heading not towards the kitchen, but towards the guest room. The door closed quietly, and he realized that she had no intention of returning. He pushed his plate away, rubbed his face with his hands, and cursed under his breath. He didn't like how things turned out. He didn't want to quarrel, didn't want her to go to sleep in another room. But her evasiveness, her anger, all this only increased his anxiety. He remembered Jason, his smile, the way he spoke to Melissa during dinner. Maybe it's stupid, but the thought that she could have met him yesterday couldn't get out of her head. Tom turned off the light in the kitchen and went up to the bedroom. The bed looked too big without her, and he lay down, staring at the ceiling. Sleep did not come. He could hear the waves crashing against the rocks outside his window and thought about how far he and Melissa had come in that cold silence. In the guest room, Melissa lay under a thin blanket, listening to the same waves. She was cold, but she didn't go for a second blanket. She didn't want to cross paths with Tom. She was angry at him, but even more angry at herself. Why didn't she tell the truth? Why didn't you admit that you met Jason? Maybe then this quarrel would not have happened. But the thought of having to justify herself to Tom still infuriated her. The night passed in silence, separated by the walls of the old house. Both lay awake, thinking about the same thing, that their attempt to fix everything was falling apart at the seams, and about what would happen next. The morning after the quarrel with Tom turned out to be difficult. Melissa woke up in the guest room, feeling cold in her legs and a heaviness in her chest. She lay looking at the ceiling as the sun's rays filtered through the thin curtains. The house was quiet. Tom, it seemed, was still sleeping or did not want to break the silence that hung between them after yesterday. She stood up, pulled on jeans and a sweater, and went down to the kitchen, trying to move silently. There was an untouched plate of pasta on the table that Tom had prepared the day before, and it made her feel a pang of guilt. But the anger still outweighed his suspicions. His tone still burned her from the inside. Tom appeared in the kitchen half an hour later, when she was already finishing her coffee. His hair was disheveled, and there were shadows under his eyes. He clearly slept no better than she did. He stopped in the doorway, looking at her. "Good morning," he said hoarsely, as if checking to see if she would answer. "Morning," Melissa responded briefly, without raising her eyes from her mug. He nodded, walked over to the coffee maker, and poured himself a cup. The tension between them was palpable, but neither wanted to start the conversation first. Finally, Tom sat down opposite, twirling the mug in his hands. "Did you plan anything today?" he asked, trying to sound neutral. Melissa shrugged. "Maybe I'll go to the village. Products are running out." "Do you want me with you?" he suggested, and hope flashed in his voice. She hesitated, but the thought of spending the day with him after yesterday's fight seemed unbearable. She needed space, time to understand herself. "No, I can handle it. You were tired of repairs yesterday." Tom nodded, although his face tensed slightly. "Okay, be careful." She stood up, put the mug in the sink, and went to get ready, feeling his gaze on her back. She didn't like this silent truce, but she didn't know how to break it without starting all over again. Melissa walked out of the house with a small bag slung over her shoulder, heading towards the path leading to Lobster Cove. She really intended to go to the store, but deep down she was hoping for something else, a distraction, a breath of freedom from the oppressive atmosphere of the house. The weather was clear, with a light wind that drove the waves towards the shore. She walked along the cliff, breathing in the salty air, when she heard footsteps behind her. "Melissa!" A familiar voice rang out, and she turned around. Jason walked towards her with a wide smile, wearing a dark green jacket and jeans. In his hands he held a pair of fishing rods. "Are you walking alone again?" She smiled involuntarily, feeling his presence instantly relieve some of the tension. "Hello?" "Yes, I decided to walk to the village." "Great," he said, stopping next to her. "But the village will wait. I'm just getting ready to go fishing. Do you want to come with me? I have a boat at the marina and the weather is perfect." Melissa froze. The offer was tempting: the open sea, the sun, Jason's company. She wanted to say yes right away, but the image of Tom sitting in the kitchen with his tired attempt to establish contact flashed through her head. She knew that she had to refuse, but something inside, fatigue from quarrels, a thirst for ease, pushed her to another decision. "Sounds great," she finally said. "Just for a little while, okay? I promise not to hold you captive." He winked. "Let's go, the boat is ready." She nodded, and they headed towards the pier. Conflicting feelings fought inside her: excitement from spontaneity and slight guilt for not telling Tom the truth. But she shrugged it off, deciding that one day wouldn't change anything. Jason's boat was small but sturdy, wooden, with a motor and a couple of seats. He helped Melissa climb up, holding out his hand, and she felt the warmth of his palm as their fingers touched. He started the engine, and they pulled away from the dock, leaving Lobster Cove behind. The wind hit her face, and Melissa took a deep breath, feeling the stress of the last few days dissolve into the salty air. "Have you ever fished?" Jason asked, shouting over the noise of the engine. "Once, with Tom," she answered, looking at the water. "But I tangled the line more than I caught it." He laughed, and his laughter was so infectious that she couldn't help but smile. "It's okay. Today I'll teach you. I have enough patience." They stopped a few miles offshore, where the waves were calmer and the horizon seemed endless. Jason turned off the engine, and silence enveloped them, interrupted only by the splash of water against the sides. He took out his fishing rods, showed her how to set the bait, and they cast the lines into the water. "Now we wait," he said, sitting down next to her. Their shoulders were almost touching, and Melissa suddenly realized how close he was sitting. "The main thing is to relax. The fish will come on its own." "Are you sure about this?" she teased, looking at him. "Absolutely," he answered with that sly smile of his. "I'm a pro." They chatted about everything and nothing about the sea, about how he once caught a crab instead of a fish, about how she was afraid of water as a child. Jason was light, open, and with him Melissa felt freer than at home. She didn't notice how time flew by until the sun rose higher, filling the boat with warmth. "You know," he said suddenly, looking at her, "you look happier than that evening at your house. The sea suits you." She looked away, feeling his words touch something inside. "Maybe it's just the air, or your company." "I hope it's the second," he answered, and his voice became a little quieter, softer. He leaned a little closer, checking her line, and his hand accidentally touched her wrist. Melissa flinched, but didn't move away. "You seem to be biting," he said, but did not remove his hand, but slightly squeezed her fingers, helping to hold the fishing rod. His touch was warm, confident, and she felt her pulse quicken. "Is it true?" she asked, trying to sound calm, although her voice trembled slightly. "Let's check it out," he said, and they started pulling the line together. There was a small fish on the hook, and Jason deftly removed it, showing it to Melissa. "You see, I told you I would teach you." She laughed, looking at his pleased face. "You are right. Maybe I'm not hopeless." "You're definitely not hopeless," he said, and his gaze became more serious. He put the fish in the bucket and turned to her, without removing his hand from her wrist. "Melissa, I'm serious. You're special, and I don't understand how anyone cannot see this." Her heart beat faster. She knew she should look away, laugh it off, but instead she stayed there, looking into his green eyes. A tension hung between them, subtle but strong like a magnet. Jason slowly removed his hand from the fishing rod and touched her palm, intertwining their fingers. His touch was soft, but there was strength in it, and Melissa did not move away. "Jason," she began, but her voice broke. She didn't know what to say, stop him, or let this moment happen. He leaned closer, and the distance between them was reduced to just a few inches. His breath was warm, and she felt his gaze sliding over her lips. It was a moment on the edge, another second, and their lips could touch. Melissa froze, feeling desire and fear fighting inside her. She wanted this, his closeness, his warmth, but the image of Tom, his tired eyes at breakfast, popped into her head. "We shouldn't," she finally whispered, looking away. Her voice trembled, but she forced herself to move away. Jason froze, but didn't insist. He slowly removed his hand, although his fingers lingered on her palm for a moment longer. "Sorry," he said quietly. "I didn't want to rush you." "It's okay," she answered, looking at the water. Her heart was still pounding, and she wasn't sure if she regretted her decision or not. "It's just, I'm married, Jason." "I know," he nodded, and there was no resentment in his voice, only understanding. "But I couldn't help but try. I like you, Melissa. Very." She looked at him, and his honesty disarmed her. "You too," she admitted, and these words came out of their own accord. "But I don't know what to do about it." "You don't need to know right now," he said, smiling at the corner of his lips. "I won't push. Just know that I'm here." She nodded, feeling a mixture of relief and confusion. They sat in silence for a few more minutes, looking out to sea, until Jason suggested they head back to shore. The way back passed in silence, but the tension between them did not disappear. It simply lay low, waiting in the wings. When the boat docked, Jason helped her out, and their hands touched again. He held her hand for a moment, looking into her eyes. "If you want to go fishing some more, let me know," he said with a slight smile. "Thank you," she replied, taking the bag. "For everything." She left, feeling his gaze on her back. The road home was long. She deliberately went to the village and bought some groceries so that her lie to Tom would look believable. When she entered the house, Tom was sitting on the veranda with a book. "You were gone for a long time," he said, looking at the bag in her hands. "I went to a couple of stores," she answered, trying to sound natural. "How are you?" "Okay," he nodded, but his gaze was attentive. "Did you have a good walk?" "Yes," she said, walking past him into the kitchen. Her voice was even, but inside she felt guilt and desire fighting each other. She didn't kiss Jason, but she was so close to it that it hardly mattered, and it scared her more than she was willing to admit. The morning after Melissa returned from her hiking to the village began with deceptive silence. Tom sat in the kitchen, looking out the window at the gray sky that promised rain. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Her explanation about the shops sounded plausible, but there was something evasive in her voice, in her eyes, that he could not ignore. They had hardly spoken since that quarrel, and every new day in this house only emphasized the cracks between them. He wanted to fix everything, but didn't know where to start. When Melissa came downstairs, she looked put together jeans, a sweater, her hair in a loose ponytail. She poured herself some coffee and said a quick good morning without looking at him. I was thinking maybe I'd go fishing today, Tom said, trying to sound casual. I'll call Jason. Do you want to join us? Melissa froze with a mug in her hands, but quickly pulled herself together. No, I'll probably stay. I'll read or go for a walk later. As you wish, he nodded, although her refusal stung him slightly. Then I'll call him. He took out his phone and texted Jason a quick message. Hey, wanna go fishing today? The weather looks like it's holding up. The answer came almost immediately. Great idea. Meet me at the pier in an hour. Tom got up, collected his things, his father's old fishing rod and jacket, and left, telling Melissa, I'll be back for lunch. She nodded, looking after him. When the door closed, she exhaled, feeling a mixture of relief and guilt. She needed time alone to figure out what to do about what happened on the boat with Jason. She couldn't get his touch, his words, the moment their lips almost touched out of her mind. It was wrong, but so damn attractive. Tom met Jason at the Lobster Cove Marina. He was already preparing the boat, dragging fishing rods and a box of bait. He looked as usual relaxed, confident, with the same smile that once made him the life of the party at school. Glad I called, Jason said, clapping Tom on the shoulder. We haven't fished together for a long time. Where's Melissa? Stayed at home, Tom answered, climbing into the boat. She said she wasn't in the mood. It's a pity, Jason said, but his tone was too light, and Tom involuntarily became wary. He couldn't help but think that something was going on between his friend and his wife, although he had no evidence, only intuition and growing irritation. They set off, and the boat skidded across the water, leaving the dock behind. Jason led the conversation, reminiscing about school stories, joking about their former football coach, but Tom answered in monosyllables, lost in his thoughts. He looked at the water, trying to concentrate on fishing, but his eyes kept returning to Jason. He seemed too happy, too relaxed, and it was infuriating. While Jason was tinkering with the motor, Tom decided to grab some bait from the box. He opened the lid and froze. Among the fishing line and hooks lay a thin silver necklace with a small star pendant. His heart sank. He recognized him immediately. It was Melissa's necklace, the one he gave her for their 3rd anniversary. She wore it almost every day, but he hadn't seen it on her for the last couple of days. And here it is in Jason's boat. What is this? Tom asked, picking up the necklace with his fingers. His voice was low, tense. Jason turned around and his smile faltered for a moment. Oh, this? Someone must have left it. I sometimes take locals fishing. Someone left it, Tom repeated, looking into his eyes. It's Melissa's necklace, Jason. I gave it to her. Jason shrugged, but his gaze became a little sharper. Maybe she forgot it while she was here. She was fishing with me a couple of days ago, didn't I tell you? Tom clenched the necklace in his fist, feeling the blood rush to his face. No, I didn't. And she does too. When was this? A couple of days ago, Jason answered casually. She was walking by the pier, and I invited her for a ride. Nothing like that, just fishing. Just fishing, Tom repeated, and his voice became colder. Why did she tell me that she went to the village to buy groceries? Jason looked at him, a hint of challenge flashing in his eyes. I don't know, dude. Ask her. I just told her to unwind. Tom was silent, looking at the necklace in his hand. His mind was filled with images Melissa and Jason on that boat, laughing, talking, maybe something more. He didn't want to believe it, but the evidence in his hand and his wife's evasiveness added up to a gloomy picture. He put the necklace in his pocket, deciding not to continue the argument. But a mixture of anger and pain was already boiling inside him. "Okay," he said finally, "let's go fishing." The rest of the trip passed in tense silence. They caught a couple of fish, but Tom barely noticed it. When they returned to the dock, he said goodbye to Jason with a curt nod and walked away, clutching the necklace in his pocket. He decided not to ask Melissa directly yet. Instead, he will watch. Returning home, Tom found Melissa on the veranda with a book. She looked up as he entered and smiled slightly. "How's the fishing?" she asked, closing the book. "Fine," he answered, trying to sound even. "We caught a little." "What did you do?" "I was reading, walking along the shore," she said, and her voice was too calm. "Nothing special." He nodded, but his chest was tight. He wanted to throw the necklace on the table, ask why she was lying, but he restrained himself. Instead, he said, "I'm tired. I'll go and lie down." Melissa looked at him with slight surprise, but said nothing. Tom went into the bedroom, leaving her alone. Lying on the bed, he decided that he would keep an eye on her. If she's dating Jason, he'll find out. That evening, Melissa received a text from Jason. "Meet me at the lighthouse at midnight. I want to show you the stars." She stared at the screen for a long time, feeling her heart speed up. After that fishing trip, she tried to stay away from him, but his words, his closeness did not leave her mind. She knew it was dangerous, but the craving was stronger than the fear. When Tom fell asleep or pretended to fall asleep, she quietly got up, put on her jacket, and left the house. The night was clear. The moon illuminated the path to the lighthouse, an old structure on the edge of a cliff. Jason was waiting for her there, leaning against the railing with a bottle of wine in his hands. "You've come," he said, smiling. "I thought you'd change your mind." "I almost changed my mind," she admitted, coming closer. But the stars sounded tempting. He laughed as he opened the bottle and poured the wine into 2 plastic glasses. They sat on a bench, looking at the sky strewn with stars. The conversation flowed easily about little things, about the past, about how he loved this place as a child. But with every minute, the tension between them grew. Jason moved closer until his knee touched hers. "You are beautiful under this light," he said quietly, looking into her eyes. "Even more beautiful than during the day." Melissa felt warmth on her cheeks and looked away. "You're complimenting me again." "Because I can't stop," he answered, his voice deepening. He placed the glass on the bench and took her hand, intertwining their fingers. "Melissa, I don't want to pretend. I like you. Very." She looked at him, and his gaze was so open, so attractive that she could not find words. He leaned closer, and this time she didn't stop him. His lips touched hers softly, almost timidly, but when she responded, the kiss became deeper, more insistent. His hand slid around her waist, pulling her closer, and she wrapped her arms around his neck, giving in to the moment. The kiss grew into something more. They stood, clinging to each other, and Jason led her to the wall of the lighthouse, where the shadow hid them from the light of the moon. His hands slid under her jacket, and she trembled not from the cold, but from the heat that spread through her body. Her fingers tangled in his hair, and she forgot about everything about Tom, about the house, about the fact that this was wrong. There were only his lips, his breath, his warmth. Tom didn't sleep. When he heard Melissa quietly leave the house, he stood up and took the binoculars that were in a drawer in the living room. He knew it was crazy, but he couldn't stop. He walked onto the beach, staying in the shade of the trees, and pointed his binoculars towards the lighthouse, a place she had loved since their first trips here. At first, he saw nothing but the dark silhouette of the lighthouse. But then I noticed movement, 2 figures near the bench. He aimed the binoculars, and his breathing stopped. It was Melissa, her blonde hair, her jacket. And Jason is next to him, too close, too intimate. They kissed, and Tom saw how her arms hugged him, how their bodies pressed against each other. When they walked back to the wall of the lighthouse, he lowered his binoculars, feeling like everything inside was collapsing. Anger and powerlessness tore him apart. He wanted to run there, tear them off each other, scream, fight. But the legs did not move. He stood, clutching his binoculars until his knuckles turned white, and watched as his wife, the woman he had loved for 8 years, dissolved in the arms of another. The pain was sharp, like a knife, but something else smoldered underneath it, the understanding that he himself had brought them to this. His detachment, his work, his inability to hear her before. He turned around and walked back towards the house, not knowing what to do next. Melissa returned an hour later, quietly sneaking into the guest room, thinking he was asleep. But Tom lay in the dark, looking at the ceiling, and every second he saw that kiss, those hands, that moment that he could not cancel. His world had collapsed, and he didn't know how to put it back together. After that night at the lighthouse, Tom did not sleep until the morning. He lay in his bedroom, staring at the ceiling as images of Melissa and Jason played in his head like a broken tape. Anger seethed inside him, but underneath there was something deeper, the fear of losing her completely. He saw her slipping away and realized that he was no less to blame than she was. His detachment, his endless work, his inability to give her what she was looking for, all this had led them here. But he didn't want to give up. He decided to fight for her, to regain the passion that once connected them before it was too late. The morning came gray and cold. Melissa came down from the guest room where she had slept after her overnight elopement and looked tired but collected. Tom sat in the kitchen with a mug of coffee, trying to hide the storm inside. He didn't tell her that he saw her with Jason. He didn't want an explosion that would destroy everything right now. Instead, he decided to take action. "Good morning," he said, looking at her over the top of his mug. His voice was smooth, but there was tension in it. "Morning," she answered briefly, pouring herself some coffee. She avoided his gaze, and this only added fuel to the fire of his determination. "I thought maybe we could do something special today," he began, putting down his mug. "Dinner, just the two of us, just like before." Melissa looked up, slightly surprised. "Dinner?" "Yes," he nodded, forcing himself to smile. "I'll cook. Candles, wine, everything is as it should be. We need to spend time together." She hesitated, and he noticed how her fingers gripped the mug a little tighter. "Okay," she said finally, but there was no enthusiasm in her voice. "If you want." "I want to," he answered firmly. "It'll be great, Mel. I promise." She nodded, but quickly went out to the veranda with coffee, leaving him alone. Tom exhaled, feeling his heart pounding. It was a chance, small, fragile, but a chance. He had to show her that things could still be the same, that he hadn't given up. The day passed in preparation. Tom went to Lobster Cove, bought fresh seafood oysters and lobster, which she once adored, a bottle of expensive white wine, and even candles, which he found at a local store. He decided to have dinner on the veranda, overlooking the ocean, just like when they first came here. Then they could sit there for hours, laugh, kiss, and plan the future. He wanted to return at least a shadow of that feeling. By evening, the house was filled with the smell of fried garlic and oil. Tom set the table on the veranda, a white tablecloth, which he dug out from the closet, 2 glasses, candles, and old candlesticks. He put on his best shirt, the dark blue one Melissa had picked out for him, and even shaved for the first time in a week. He looked at himself in the mirror and thought that maybe all was not lost. Melissa came downstairs at 7 when he called her. She was wearing a simple dress, light and cream-colored, but even in it, she looked beautiful, and Tom felt a pang of pain at how much he still loved her. She stopped at the entrance to the veranda, looking at the table. "You tried," she said, and a note of surprise flashed in her voice. "I wanted everything to be just right," he replied, pulling out a chair for her. "Sit down." She sat down, and he took the seat opposite, pouring wine into glasses. The candles flickered, casting a soft light on her face, and for a moment Tom saw the Melissa he had met 8 years ago, with sparkles in her blue eyes and a slight smile. He raised his glass. "For us," he said quietly, "so that we remember why we are here." She nodded, clinking glasses with him, but her smile was forced. They started eating oysters with lemon, lobster with garlic butter. Tom tried to keep the conversation going. He remembered their first trip here, how they almost sank the rented boat, how she laughed when he tried to catch a crab with his bare hands. But her answers were short, polite, and he could feel her slipping away even as he sat across from him. After eating, he decided to move on. He stood up, walked over to her, and extended his hand. "Shall we dance?" Melissa looked at him with slight bewilderment. "Here? Without music?" "I'll play something," he said, taking out his phone and playing an old jazz track they used to love. He extended his hand again. "Come on, Mel." She sighed but stood up, allowing him to take her hand. He pulled her closer, putting his arm around her waist, and they began to move slowly to the music. Her body was tense, and Tom felt it, but he didn't back down. He leaned towards her ear, whispering, "Do you remember how we danced at the party where we met? I then stepped on your foot, but you still stayed with me." She smiled slightly, but didn't answer. He ran his hand along her back, trying to light a spark. His lips touched her neck, a light, careful kiss, and he felt her freeze. "Tom," she said quietly, pulling away. "No need." He stopped, looking at her. Her eyes were cold, distant, and it hit him harder than he expected. "Why?" he asked, and there was pain in his voice. "I just want us to be like before." "I can't," she replied, looking away. "Not now." "Why not now?" he insisted, stepping closer. "Mel, I see that we are moving away. I want to fix this. I want you." She stepped back, crossing her arms over her chest. "It's not that simple, Tom. You can't just throw dinner and think it's all going to come back." "What should I do?" he asked, his voice getting louder. "Should I say that I love you?" "I love you, Melissa. I don't want to lose you." She looked at him, a mixture of guilt and fatigue flashing in her eyes. "I know you're trying, but I don't feel the same. Not now." Her words were like a blow. Tom froze, feeling everything inside him shrink. He wanted to scream, ask about Jason, throw what he saw in her face, but he restrained himself. Instead, he said, "Then what are we doing here?" "I don't know," she answered quietly. "I need time." She turned and went into the house, leaving him standing on the veranda. The candles were burning out, the wine was cooling in the glasses, and the music was still playing, but now it sounded like a mockery. Tom looked after her, clenching his fists. He saw her walking up the stairs to the guest room and knew his attempt had failed. She was cold, distant, and he knew why Jason. But he still couldn't bring himself to admit it out loud. Melissa closed the guest room door, lay down on the bed, and closed her eyes. It hurt her to see his efforts, to feel his love, but she could not answer. After that night at the lighthouse, after kissing Jason, after she allowed herself to cross the line, everything changed. She didn't know if she wanted Tom or was just clinging to the past out of a sense of duty, and that scared her most of all. Tom remained on the veranda, looking out at the ocean. He understood that he was losing her, and this dinner was his last attempt to keep her. But she left, and he was left alone with dashed hopes and anger that he could no longer suppress. After a romantic dinner goes wrong, Tom and Melissa find themselves back in their own separate worlds. The day passed in oppressive silence. She was reading on the veranda, he was tinkering with something in the garage, avoiding each other. The tension between them became almost palpable, but neither dared to break it. Melissa felt guilty for her coldness, but thoughts of Jason, his touch, his voice haunted her. She wanted to escape from this burden, and, as if fate had heard her, in the evening a message came from Jason. "Come to me today. I want to show you something. 8 p.m. She stared at the screen for a long time, feeling her heart speed up. It was risky, reckless, but she had already crossed the line at the lighthouse, and now stopping seemed more difficult than going on. She responded with a curt okay and went into the guest room to get ready. She put on a light dress, the same cream one that she had worn at dinner with Tom, but this time without any desire to please him. She told herself she just wanted a distraction, but deep down she knew she was lying. Tom was sitting in the living room when she came down. He looked up from the TV, noticing her dress and the bag over her shoulder. "Where are you going?" he asked, and there was a hint of alarm in his voice. "I'll take a walk," she answered, trying to sound casual. "Don't wait, I'll be back late." He nodded, but his gaze became heavy. "Be careful." She left without looking back, feeling his eyes on her back. Tom remained seated, clutching the remote control in his hand. He knew she was lying. It was in her tone, in her haste. After the necklace in the boat, after that night at the lighthouse, he could no longer deceive himself. He stood up, took his binoculars and jacket, and followed her, keeping his distance. He was torn with anger and despair, but he had to make sure. Jason's house stood half a mile from their cottage, closer to the shore, surrounded by pine trees and a low fence. It was a small wooden house with wide windows and a terrace overlooking the ocean. Melissa knocked on the door and Jason answered almost immediately, wearing a simple t-shirt and jeans. His smile was warm, but the same light that she saw at the lighthouse burned in his eyes. "Glad you came," he said, letting her inside. "Wine or something stronger?" "Wine," she answered, looking around. It was cozy inside. Wooden walls, an old sofa with a blanket, a fireplace with crackling wood. The quiet sound of the surf could be heard from the window, and the summer night enveloped the house in soft warmth. He poured 2 glasses of red and sat next to her on the sofa, a little closer than necessary. They drank, chatting about trifles, about the stars, about the sea, about how he once almost got burned trying to light that fireplace. But the conversation quickly died down, and the tension between them became almost electric. Jason set his glass down and turned to her. "I can't stop thinking about you," he said quietly, looking into her eyes. "After that night at the lighthouse, you're in my head, Melissa." She felt warmth spreading through her body from the wine, from his words, from his proximity. "Me too," she admitted, and it was true. She didn't want to resist anymore. He leaned down and kissed her, slowly but with growing passion. She responded by hugging his neck, and the kiss became deeper, hotter. His hands slid to her waist, pulling her closer, and she trembled, feeling the desire overwhelm her. They stood up without breaking the kiss, and he led her to the bedroom, where a large window overlooking the ocean. The surf whispered behind the glass, and the moon cast a silvery light on the bed. Jason took off his t-shirt in one motion, revealing tan skin, and Melissa ran her hands over his chest, feeling the heat of his body. He pulled off her dress, throwing it on the floor, and pressed her to him, kissing her neck, shoulders, collarbones. Her breath hitched as his fingers unclasped her bra, and it fell, leaving her naked in front of him. She felt no shame, only wild, unbridled desire. They fell onto the bed, and everything became a whirlwind. His hands were everywhere, on her hips, her back, her breasts, and she responded in kind, scratching his back, pulling him closer. He entered her sharply, with hungry force, and she arched, screaming with pleasure. Their movements were fast, desperate, as if they were trying to quench a thirst that had been building up for too long. The bed creaked beneath them, but the sound was lost in the sound of the surf and their intermittent breathing. Melissa clung to him, her nails digging into his shoulders as wave after wave of pleasure washed over her. Jason whispered her name, his voice hoarse with passion, and she lost herself in it, forgetting about everything, about Tom, about marriage, about guilt. They continued, varying their rhythms, slowing down and then speeding up again until sweat coated their skin and the air became thick with the heat of their bodies. They finally peaked together and Melissa screamed, pressing herself against him until he collapsed next to him, panting. They lay in silence, hugging each other, listening to the waves crash against the shore outside the window. The summer night enveloped them, and for the first time in a long time, Melissa felt alive. Tom saw everything. He stood in the shade of the pine trees outside Jason's house, clutching his binoculars until his fingers ached. He followed Melissa, keeping his distance, and when he saw her enter the house, his worst fears were confirmed. Through the large bedroom window, which was not curtained, he watched as they kissed, as they fell onto the bed, as their bodies merged in a furious dance. Every moan, every gesture cut into his brain like a knife. He was torn with anger. He wanted to rush in there, break everything, pull her out of his hands. But the legs did not move. He watched, paralyzed by a mixture of anger and powerlessness, until the scene ended and they lay down next to each other, embracing each other. His wife, Melissa, lay in the arms of another, and he could do nothing about it. The pain was so acute that he could hardly breathe. He lowered the binoculars, feeling tears sting his eyes, but did not let them fall. He did not knock on the door, did not shout. Instead, he turned around and walked back towards his house, each step heavy as lead. The night was quiet, only the surf whispered behind him, and Tom felt empty, broken. He knew their marriage was dead, not because of that night, but because of everything that had led up to it, and he didn't know what to do next. When he entered the house, he sat on the sofa in the dark, staring into space. Melissa returned a couple of hours later, quietly sneaking into the guest room, thinking he was sleeping. But Tom didn't sleep. He sat listening to her steps and realized that he had lost her completely. And for the first time, he didn't know if he wanted her back. After the night Tom witnessed Melissa cheating on Jason, he stayed up until dawn. He sat in the darkness of the living room, staring at the empty fireplace as images of their passion burned through his mind. The morning came with gray skies and a cold wind, but inside Tom the storm only grew stronger. He did not scream, did not break furniture, did not rush to her with accusations. He was silent, accumulating anger and pain until they turned into something sharp and cold. He decided that he wouldn't let them just get away with it. If their marriage fails, let it be on his terms. By noon, he had made his decision. He took the phone and texted Jason, "Come for dinner tonight, 7 p.m. I want to talk." The answer came quickly, "Sounds tempting. I will." Tom put the phone down and looked at Melissa, who was sitting on the porch with a book, pretending to read. He knew she felt his gaze, but she didn't look up. Her face was pale, there were shadows under her eyes. She looked as if she, too, had not slept. "Jason is coming over for dinner tonight," he said, stepping out onto the veranda. His voice was smooth, almost friendly, but there was steel in it. Melissa raised her head and her gaze wavered. "For what?" "Just like that," he shrugged, looking at the ocean. "I want to sit together, the three of us. Like friends." She pursed her lips but nodded. "Fine. I'll help with the cooking." "No need," he snapped, a little sharper than he intended. "I myself." She didn't argue, just lowered her eyes back to the book. Tom went into the kitchen, feeling everything boiling inside. He wasn't going to have an ordinary dinner. This would be a scene where everyone would play their part, and he would see how far they would go with their lies. By 7 in the evening, the house was filled with the smell of grilled steak and garlic bread. Tom set the table in the living room, not on the veranda, as before, but inside, where the light was dim and the shadows long. He set out 3 plates, a bottle of whiskey instead of wine, and lit one candle not for romance, but to emphasize the tension. He put on a black shirt, rolled up the sleeves, and waited. Jason arrived promptly at 7, knocking on the door with that confident smile of his. He was wearing a gray sweatshirt and jeans and holding a bottle of beer. He looked relaxed, but Tom noticed how his gaze slid to Melissa, who was standing by the stairs. "Hey, old man," Jason said, holding out his beer. "Have you decided to have a men's evening?" "Not really," Tom replied, accepting the bottle and gesturing for him to come in. "Melissa is here too. Family dinner, so to speak." Jason nodded, glancing briefly at Melissa. She stood silently, dressed in a simple t-shirt and jeans, her arms crossed over her chest. Her face was tense, and Tom could see how she was trying not to look at Jason for too long. "Sit down," Tom said, pointing to the chair opposite him. Melissa took a seat between them, and the table became an arena where everyone felt on edge. Tom poured whiskey into glasses without asking if they wanted it. He raised his hand and said, "For old friends and new times." Jason chuckled as he clinked his glass with him. "You can drink this." Melissa took the glass, but her hand shook slightly. She took a small sip and put it back, looking at the plate. Dinner began in silence, interrupted only by the clinking of forks. Tom watched them, the way Jason leaned back in his chair with easy confidence, the way Melissa avoided his gaze. The atmosphere was heating up every minute, and he decided to add fuel to the fire. "I found something interesting in your boat." "Necklace with a star pendant." Melissa froze, her fork stopping halfway to her plate. Jason leaned forward slightly, and his gaze became sharper. "Necklace? Well, you said it was Melissa's necklace. So what?" You lost him, didn't you, Mel? When were you fishing with Jason? Her face turned pale, and she pursed her lips. Yes, I guess. I don't remember exactly. You don't remember, Tom repeated with a slight grin. Strange. You almost didn't take it off. And then suddenly I forgot in the boat. Jason coughed, taking a sip of his whiskey. I didn't think it was so important. Oh, it's important, Tom said, and his voice became colder. Very important. Just like the fact that my wife said that she went to the village and did not ride on the sea with you. Melissa raised her head sharply, her eyes sparkling. Tom, that's enough. Are you starting again? Starting what? He asked, looking at her with feigned surprise. Ask where you have been, or why are you lying to me? Jason put down his fork and crossed his arms. Hey man, relax. We were just fishing. Nothing like that. We were just fishing, Tom repeated, and his grin grew wider, but his eyes remained icy. And I just found her necklace in your boat. Coincidence, right? The atmosphere became suffocating. Melissa clenched her fists on the table, her breathing quickening. She realized that Tom knew not everything, maybe, but enough. His words, his look, his hidden rage, everything indicated that he was playing with them like a cat with mice. Tom, stop, she said, and her voice trembled. You're acting paranoid. Paranoid? He asked, leaning towards her. Do you behave like a person who has nothing to hide? Tell me, Mel, where were you the night before last? When did you walk? Her eyes widened, and she felt panic rising in her throat. He saw. He knew. She jumped out of her chair, knocking over the glass and spilling whiskey on the tablecloth. You are unbearable, she screamed, her voice breaking into a squeal. You control me all the time, interrogate me as if I were a criminal. I can't do this anymore. Tom leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms, his grin almost mocking. Can't? Then tell the truth, Melissa. Tell me how you walked at the lighthouse, or at Jason's house. She gasped, her face flushed with stress and shame. She glanced at Jason, who stood up, trying to intervene. Hey, Mel, calm down, he said, stepping towards her and placing his hand on her shoulder. Let's talk normally. Don't touch me, she shouted, staggering away from him. Her nerves were on edge, and she felt like everything was collapsing. You both are unbearable. You, she pointed at Tom, are following me like a maniac. And you, she turned to Jason, you think you can just take what you want and everything will be fine. Jason raised his hands, trying to calm her down. Melissa, I didn't want to complicate things. Just breathe, okay? But she didn't listen. She grabbed the plate from the table and threw it on the floor. It shattered into pieces, and the steak fell onto the wooden boards. I'm tired of this. From both of you. I can't live like this. Tom looked at her, and his grin did not leave his face, although pain flashed in his eyes. Well, finally, he said quietly. At least some honesty. Her hysteria reached its peak. She screamed, waving her arms until tears ran down her cheeks. Do you think this is funny? Do you think I'm happy in this marriage? You don't even notice me until you decide to play detective. And now you're sitting here grinning like it's a game. Jason tried to approach again. Mel, listen, let's go out and cool down. Don't you dare, she snapped, pushing him away. You are part of this. You made everything worse. Tom stood up, slowly, like a predator, and walked towards her. Worse? Did he make it worse, or did you, Melissa? When did you kiss him at the lighthouse? Or when you had sex with him at his house while I watched? Her breathing stopped. She stared at him, eyes full of horror and tears. He knew. All. Jason froze too, his face darkening. Tom, you're going too far, he said, stepping forward. This is not your show. Not mine? Tom asked, turning to him. His smirk disappeared, replaced by cold rage. This is my wife, Jason. And you got in where you weren't invited. Melissa screamed, covering her ears with her hands. Enough, enough, I'm leaving. She rushed to the door, but Tom grabbed her hand. Where are you going? To him? Again? Let go, she squealed, struggling. Her voice broke, and she hit him in the chest. I hate you. I hate you both." Jason stepped towards them, trying to separate them, but Tom pushed him back. "Don't interfere," he growled. "You've done enough already." Melissa broke free and ran out of the house, slamming the door so hard the windows shook. Jason looked at Tom, his face tense. "Are you satisfied?" he asked quietly. "Was it worth it?" Tom grinned, but there was emptiness in his eyes. "Get out, Jason. Dinner is over." Jason shook his head, took his jacket, and left. Tom was left standing in the middle of the living room, looking at the broken plate, spilled whiskey, and empty chairs. He achieved what he wanted. He made them both lose their tempers. He showed that he knew. But the victory was bitter. Melissa left, and he didn't know if she would come back. And if he returns, what will be left of it? He sat down on the sofa, picked up the bottle of whiskey, and took a long swig straight from his throat. Night fell on the house, and the sound of the surf was the only sound that filled the silence. The night after dinner was dark and cold, with a wind that drove the waves towards the shore with furious persistence. Tom stood in the living room, looking at the broken plates and spilled whiskey that remained on the floor. His chest constricted with anger, pain, and some strange relief. He achieved his goal. He tore off the masks, forced Melissa and Jason to face the truth. But this did not bring him either victory or peace. All he felt was emptiness. Their marriage, their 8 years together, their attempts to make everything work in this house, on the coast of Maine, everything had collapsed, and he no longer saw the point in clinging to the rubble. He went up to the bedroom where they had once slept together and pulled out an old suitcase from under the bed. His movements were mechanical. He threw shirts, jeans, and a jacket at him, without caring about order. Melissa's necklace, the same one with the star pendant he'd found in Jason's boat, lay on the dresser. He took it, clenched it in his fist, feeling the metal cutting into his skin, and threw it into the suitcase. It was the last symbol of their past, and he didn't want to leave it here. Melissa still hasn't returned. After she ran out of the house crying, screaming that she hated them both, Tom heard her footsteps fade into the night. He did not follow her. He had no strength, no desire. He knew that she was either at the lighthouse or at Jason's, and this thought only strengthened his decision. He zipped up his suitcase, went downstairs, took the car keys, and went out onto the veranda. The ocean rustled in the darkness, and the moon cast a faint light on the path leading to the road. Tom threw his suitcase into the back seat of his SUV, got behind the wheel, and started the engine. He didn't know where he was going, back to Chicago, to a friend, to a motel on the highway, but he knew he couldn't stay. He pulled out onto a gravel road, and his headlights revealed pine trees and a deserted shore from the darkness. In the rearview mirror, his parents' house, where he and Melissa had once been happy, became smaller and smaller until it disappeared completely. He walked off into the night, leaving behind everything he had ever loved. Melissa returned to the house an hour after she ran out. Her face was wet from tears, her hair was disheveled from the wind, and her dress stuck to her body from the dampness. She stopped at the lighthouse, looking out at the waves until the cold drove her back. She had nowhere to go. Jason offered to stay with him, but she refused, feeling that, despite everything, he had become a stranger to her. She wanted passion, she wanted to feel alive, and he gave it to her, but the price was too high. She didn't want it to end like this. She didn't want to destroy her marriage. She didn't want this pain. But now it was too late. When she entered the house, the silence hit her like a slap in the face. The lights in the living room were off, the broken plates were still on the floor, and the chairs were just as they had left them. She called Tom quietly, almost in a whisper, but there was no answer. When she went up to the bedroom, she saw an empty chest of drawers and an open closet. Her necklace was gone, as were his belongings. She realized that he was gone, and this thought fell upon her with all its weight. Melissa fell onto the bed, burying her face in the pillow, and burst into tears. Tears flowed uncontrollably, soaking the fabric until her body began to tremble with sobs. She didn't know what she wanted: to bring Tom back, to erase the last weeks, to start all over again. She wanted the passion she lost with him and found it with Jason, but it brought her no happiness, only chaos. Her screams at dinner, her hysterics, all this was desperation, an attempt to escape from the trap that she herself had created. And now she was left alone in this house, with the echo of her mistakes. The door creaked, and she raised her head, wiping away tears. Jason stood in the doorway, his silhouette dark in the moonlight. He looked worried but hesitant. "I came to check on you," he said quietly, stepping inside. "You ran away and I—" "Go away," she interrupted, her voice hoarse from tears. "Please, Jason, just go away." He froze, looking at her. "Melissa, I didn't mean for this to happen. I thought—" "I know what you were thinking," she said, sitting up on the bed. Her eyes were red, but her gaze was sharp. "You thought you could give me what I was missing. And I thought so too. But that was a mistake. It was all a mistake." Jason stepped closer, extending his hand, but she recoiled. "No need. I don't need you. You're a stranger now." His face tensed, but he nodded. "If that's what you want, I won't force you." He turned and left, quietly closing the door. Melissa remained seated, listening to his footsteps fade on the gravel. She hugged herself with her arms, feeling the cold that came not only from the wind outside the window. Jason was the one who lit the fire in her, but that fire burned away everything she had. She wanted passion, but she didn't want to lose Tom. She didn't want this loneliness. Now she has neither one nor the other. She lay down on the bed, curled up into a ball, and closed her eyes. The tears were still flowing, but quieter, slower. The house was empty, like her heart. She remembered her and Tom's early years, the spontaneous trips, the laughter, the nights when they couldn't keep their hands off each other. Somewhere along the way they lost it, and she looked for sparks in another person, not realizing that by doing so she was extinguishing them completely. Tom drove along a deserted road, headlights snatching only asphalt and sparse trees from the darkness. The radio was silent, and the only sound was the hum of the engine. He didn't know where he was going, but he had no intention of returning. Melissa chose her path, and he saw how she dissolved in Jason's arms, how she gave herself completely to him. This was not just a betrayal, it was the end. He tried to bring back the passion, tried to hold on to it, but it had gone too far. He remembered her screams at dinner, her tears, her words that she hated him. Maybe she really hated her for his coldness, for his silence, for the fact that he did not notice how she was fading away. But he was also tired from lies, from pain, from trying to glue something that had long been broken. Leaving was his last act, his way of saying, "I can't do this anymore." Melissa was left alone in the house. The night dragged on endlessly, and the surf outside the window sounded like a requiem for their marriage. Jason left, Tom left, and she was left with herself, with the part of herself that craved passion and destroyed everything for it. She didn't know what would happen tomorrow, but she knew that this house was no longer her home. It was full of memories that she could neither return nor forget. She stood up, walked to the window, and looked out at the ocean. The moon hung low, reflecting on the water, and Melissa felt tears welling up in her eyes again. She wanted passion, but lost love. And now she had to live with it alone, with a quiet surf and an empty heart. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one.